Hello, my name's Henry. I'm a doctor in regional Australia, Yorta country. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. This year I'm giving half of my income to charity organisations around the world that I think are making the world a fairer, better place. Because the world's getting better all the time. It's a lot better for everyone on average than it was 100 years ago, but the world's still a very unequal place, and depending on where you live, it has a huge impact on how your life's potentially going to turn out. And I don't think it's all that fair. I've been incredibly lucky to have been born in Australia and to have been born to a loving family who's given me lots of opportunities, and a lot of people around the world have not been as lucky as me. I'm acutely aware of that, and I think we all should be. So I think it's the right thing to do, giving back. Maybe not 50%, maybe not that forever, but I think it's right to think about how much we have, and maybe instead of keeping it all to ourselves, thinking about how we could just take what we need and then give what we can. I have been having a difficult time, as I think everyone does, when it comes to thinking about charities, trying to figure out which organisations to give to, how to use money to make the world a better place. I've been giving to all sorts of organisations, and that's what's displayed here in my pyramid scheme, my ever elongating Tower of Babel of donations. And it's hard figuring out what organisations to give to, which organisations in the world are really making an impact, really improving people's lives. And I'm doing it based on the advice of global development experts around the world, and I'm doing it based on the voices of people in the grassroots, people living the world's problems. I'm also doing it based on the results of trials around the world, testing out, test projects, trialing what sort of ideas actually work out in the field. And then lastly, I'm also relying on advice, opinions from the community out there, whoever's watching, whoever wants to comment or send me a message saying how I might be able to do this in a slightly better way. And so this particular past 2 weeks I've given to 4 organisations, and I've given to the Against Malaria Foundation, I've given to Water for South Sudan, I've given to SIVA, and I've given to the Fred Hollows Foundation. So I'll talk about them each in turn. The Against Malaria Foundation is a very easy one to give to. The Against Malaria Foundation hands out mosquito nets all around the world, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, which is where malaria causes most of its problems. Malaria is a terrible disease. It kills over 400,000 people every year, and most of those people are kids, because kids are most susceptible to malaria. And that's a huge number, and one child dying is a tragedy, and 400,000 is kind of getting to the point where it's statistics, so it's all a bit depressing, and maybe we shouldn't think about it at all and just forget about it and go to brunch. No, I don't think that's right. I think we should keep it in the back of our mind. Don't let it depress us, but let it inspire us to maybe try and change things a bit. Because the thing about malaria is it's pretty easy to prevent. You prevent it by sleeping under a mosquito net, or you can prevent it with providing people with chemoprophylaxis, so drugs that stop them from getting malaria in the first place. And Against Malaria is all about that. They hand out mosquito nets to people. These nets cost between $2 and $10, depending on whether you account for admin fees and transport and all that. You give these nets to people, and evidence shows that when you give people these nets for free, it's more effective to do it for free than to make them pay a small amount for it. The evidence shows that when you give people nets, they use them, and the evidence shows that when they use them, they're less likely to get malaria. And of course, when they're less likely to get malaria, they're less likely to have serious consequences, die from it, spend time away from education, away from work. It's an incredibly effective way to help people for relatively low cost, relatively low sacrifice on my part, on your part, on our part, we can have a potentially massive impact. It's very exciting. And so the Against Malaria Foundation is always at the top of the list of effective altruist charities, this idea that we should be as effective, cost-effective as possible in the way that we give. And so Against Malaria Foundation is always at the top of those, and for good reason. It's pretty convincing. The Against Malaria Foundation is run by 9 people in the UK. They don't spend any money on fundraising. They don't spend a lot on admin. They've managed more than $350 million in donations so far, which is pretty incredible. And you might think like, oh, surely everyone's got a mosquito net by now. And the answer is no, it doesn't seem like they do. And there's more scope for mosquito nets in the future, which is great. So I'm very happy to give the Against Malaria Foundation more money. Once again, this is not the first time, probably not the last time that I'll be giving to the Against Malaria Foundation. I've given them $1,084 this past 2 weeks. And then another organisation I've given to, this is Water for South Sudan. I've given them $300 this fortnight. Waters for South Sudan drills wells. This is an organisation, they drill wells in South Sudan to give people access to clean water. Over 60% of the population of South Sudan, and South Sudan has about 11 million people in it, I think, so 60% is about 6.5 million people don't have access to clean water and safe water, that is. So unsafe water, according to UNICEF, is water that is at moderate to severe risk of being contaminated with sewerage, which is, pretty awful, and has the potential to spread all sorts of diseases, parasitic infections and cholera and all sorts of nasty things. It's a pretty basic necessity to have clean water, and we certainly wouldn't accept 60% of people not having access to clean water in Australia. So, why should we chill out about 60% of South Sudan not having access to clean water? No, we should probably be thinking about and doing something about that if we can. And through Water for South Sudan and similar organisations, seems like maybe we can have a bit of an impact. So Water for South Sudan was founded by a very inspiring man. Salva Dut is the guy that founded Water for South Sudan back in 2004. And Salva Dut is one of Sudan's lost boys. So he was forced to run away from his home during the Sudanese civil war for risk of being killed or captured and sort of recruited as a soldier. He was accepted as a refugee in the US, and it sounds like he had some great opportunities over there, and now he's gone back to Sudan and is trying to help people there, which I think is incredibly inspiring, and I'm very inspired by Salva Dut and what he's doing. They drill wells so that people have access to clean water, and they also repair wells as well. So a common criticism of this kind of activity, one that I've heard before, is like, oh yeah, they go and drill wells, but then they break a week later and, no one ever goes back and repairs them. No, Water for South Sudan goes and repairs wells as well, and they also provide education on hygiene practices. So it seems like a really cool charity. The way I found it was through Charity Navigator, although really I found it through Impact Matters. So Impact Matters is this charity evaluator organisation, or it was, because it's recently been bought out by Charity Navigator. Anyway, they did an analysis of Water for South Sudan, and Impact Matters was really impressed with Water for South Sudan and the impact it was having for a relatively low cost. Providing people with clean water is a pretty cheap thing to do ultimately, and has a potential for having a really positive impact through preventing people from getting sick. The analysis itself is like a little bit, I thought a little bit questionable maybe. I can't actually find the analysis. Charity Navigator seems to be hiding it or something. I can't find where it is. But they talk about what the analysis was, and it used data that Water for South Sudan actually provided, so it's not like it's independent data. And the data itself was interviews with both members of the villages where they were making and repairing wells, but it was also interviews with members of the staff of Water for South Sudan, so that's not really independent either. Anyway, Impact Matters is, I guess I'm relying on a little bit of appeal to expertise here in that they probably know a little bit more what they're doing than I do, but what I know of their report doesn't sounds like it's not entirely independent. Their finances are not, so they spend about 9% of their money on fundraising, which I don't think is ideal. I mean, I don't like fundraising generally. I understand why people do it because it works, because not all of us kind of are thinking about this stuff a lot of the time. So when someone comes and asks us, we are probably more likely to give rather than going out on our own and trying to seek people to give to when we have more than we need. And so fundraising works, and so people spend money on it, and I understand why that's happening, but they spend about 9% of what they get in donations on fundraising. So by giving $300 to them, about $30 of that is going to go to marketing, fundraising in some way, which I'm not super keen on. I prefer that was going to the projects that I want to support, the digging of wells and repairing of wells. Also in their finances, this is a bit odd. They've written off $218,000 of their costs in depreciation, which, as I understand, is the reduction in value of assets that they have. And I don't really understand why they would be spending as much on depreciation almost as they are on supplies. Maybe someone better at accounting than me can explain why an organisation, why that would even be in their expenditures, but how they could expend $218,000 on depreciation. Anyway, I think what they're doing ultimately seems like it potentially has massive impact, and it is rated very highly by Impact Matters. Seems like a really cool organisation. Another downside is that in order to donate to them, you have to donate through, they have this charity sort of giving service, payment service that they use, and it calls for a 3% cut of what you give, which is not ideal. So $9 of what I gave goes to those, which is not super either. Anyway, I think what they're doing is really cool. I'm very inspired by Salvador and his work, and very happy to give them $300. And then the next two organisations are SIVA and the Fred Hollows Foundation. Both of these organisations are all about people's eyesight. So either giving people their eyesight back when they're blind, or preventing them from losing their eyesight in the first place. And this can be an incredibly powerful thing to do. Giving people their eyesight back can help them in all sorts of ways, to live their lives, make their lives easier, to get education, to make work easier. Of course, having eyesight is incredibly useful for life. So both SIVA and the Fred Hollows Foundation are all about giving people glasses so that they can see, preventative medicine, stopping people from going blind, so treating things like trachoma, and then also performing and funding cataract surgeries, so replacing people's foggy lenses with shiny new artificial ones. And that procedure is incredible. In the space of 15-30 minutes, you can make a blind person see again, which is amazing. The Fred Hollows Foundation is named for Fred Hollows, and Fred Hollows is a personal hero of mine. I am incredibly inspired by him. He was a doctor, an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, and he dedicated his life to going out to poorer regions of the world where access to eye care services was not that great, and he would perform cataract surgeries on people and give them their sight back for relatively low costs, and for really massive impact. And I've always been very inspired by him and what he does. He set up the Fred Hollows Foundation to expand and carry on his work. And I just think it's fantastic. It has such an enormous potential to change people's lives for, again, relatively little cost from our perspective. How many people's sight can you restore with the amount that we would spend going out to dinner for a night Once you start thinking like that, it can go down a bit of a rabbit hole every time you think about spending money on anything. Both of these organisations, funnily enough, they spend almost the exact same percentage of money on fundraising. 16.8% of the money that they spend, or thereabouts, depending on, it's 16.8% of the revenue for Fred Hollows, and it's slightly less for Siva. In either case, it's between 16 and 17% of what they get in donations and things they're going to be spending on fundraising. And so the thing about fundraising, it's not nice to, there's something a bit grubby about the idea that if you give someone $100, they're going to spend $17, $16 of that on trying to convince other people to give them money. There's something that's like not very satisfying about that. I understand why people do it. Of course, as I've said, it's because it works. It's because we don't give without being asked most of the time. So by asking, it actually increases the amount that they make, which probably shouldn't be how it is. I think ultimately it's probably our responsibility to not wait until someone asks, until someone runs a TV ad or sends a chugger out onto the street to try and get our money. We shouldn't wait until that happens to give. We should try and seek ways to make the world a better place, organisations to give to without being asked, on our own time. And I think if we did that, companies would have to waste less money on marketing, because it's a bit of a rat race. Like, when an organisation spends money on fundraising marketing, it distracts from, all the other charities, and then they spend a little bit more on marketing, and it distracts from the first one. And it's in that game, ultimately the main winners are just advertising companies and the people selling advertising space. It's a bit of a zero-sum game. And the other downside, which I think is maybe more insidious and one that doesn't get talked about a lot, is the fact that fundraising and the amount that organisations spend on fundraising has actually had a pretty negative impact on people's faith in charities, I think. Often when you talk to people about charities and giving, their response is, charities spend most of their money on admin and fundraising. And a lot of charities do. And I think people have kind of given up a little bit. A lot of people have given up on the idea of charities at all, just because so much is spent on fundraising. I think maybe, the advertising consultants that these charity organisations are hiring are not really thinking about the long term. It's short-term gain, paying for fundraising, but maybe at some long-term pain as well. So I've been a bit reserved in how much I've given to the Fred Hollows Foundation and Siva. I give them $100 each this fortnight. I'd be very happy to hear from anyone on what your opinion is, how I can be doing this better, who I'm giving to that I shouldn't be giving to, who I'm not giving to that I should be giving to. I'm really interested to hear as many opinions as I can. I'm doing my absolute best to try and make the world a better place, as I'm sure we all are trying to do as well. I think we should all take what we need and give what we can, and I think the world would be a better place if we did. I'll see you all next time. Ciao.